Alright, folks, so we'll get to this Bruno Mars review now. This is Acid Roots, and it's been a while since I talked about Bruno Mars. I was kind of going to review 24K Magic a few years ago when it came out, but I wanted, it kind of got lost in translation, so I'm going to review it now. I've got some extra stuff in the review to kind of get with, some nice extra swag for the review. But so with this project, Bruno Mars actually had several singles, and the difference between his first and second album was the fact that Unorthodox Jukebox really took flight. So I had 5 singles. After Treasure, they kind of started tapering off, but he still managed to get some rather, at least modest, you could say, about them hits with Gorilla and then Young Girls, both of which, did well. But then he kind of took some time off, but then he had the biggest song of his career, in addition to basically the song that Billboard thinks is the song of the 2010s decade with Uptown Funk. So that song kind of had like a doo-wop kind of feel to it. Wasn't necessarily R&B, but kind of felt just more like New Jack Swing, something of that territory, something you might have heard in like 1986 or something, just with the fact that it was an absolute smash. Now, I do not own this song. I've heard it, maybe once in a blue moon on the radio, but um I don't know. I mean, to me, that's not the definitive Bruno Mars song, and there's been other songs I've listened to that have that much more enjoyment. I think just in terms of shock appeal, impact, and just word of mouth, those sorts of things dictate otherwise that this is definitely a highlight for Bruno Mars, not just album-wise, but career-wise. And main thing about that is to say, well, how is he going to follow up not just his best album thus far, but also his best song, which was not on an album? So, this leads us to 24K Magic, which I looked up on Wikipedia, and it said Bruno Mars was kind of struggling with trying to figure out what he was going to do. Like, he was a perfectionist and wanted to make sure, said something to the effect of, yes, basically said that he was not confident with the direction to go in as far as getting to 24K Magic. But obviously, I wouldn't have seen Bruno Mars as a one-hit wonder, but it might have created like a plateau for him. But luckily, it didn't, and that's kind of the situation. The main thing that troubles me with this album as to why it's not going to get like the best score is just because Bruno Mars, while he got to 5 singles on this project, he did not put enough emphasis on the album cuts. In addition to that, the fact that there's only 9 songs, I was kind of hoping. I mean, these are the kind of same complaints that you have about Thriller. I mean, you have to complain about a record like Michael Jackson's Thriller or something and say, well, I was kind of pissed off that the 2 or 3 songs that weren't singles were not good. I mean, and if you try to do something like that, how many people are going to listen? Out of the 9 songs on here, 5 of them are singles, and at least, three of those 5 singles work rather well. Actually, 4 of them do. That's kind of the situation, is just talking about that. I was impressed by a Bruno Mars single. It really sounded lively and, contagious and that sort of stuff, but the problem with it is, just for records that, Bruno Mars is a kind of individual that he's one of those people like Eminem and Lil Wayne who you listen to the album cuts because he's just so massive. And the fact that this was not on this project was kind of a surprising, and that's kind of why I was so strange about this project, was because I was thinking, okay, is there going to be a song like Moonshine, or there was a song off his Doo-Wops and Hooligans. I guess I could look that up. Song like Moonshine, or a song like Marry You, or Our First Time. Those type songs. Really, Bruno Mars has the ability to do it, but he didn't, and we just kind of crested on the singles. And it kind of, he wanted to make it feel like a 90s record, but the thing about 90s records, the complaint that I would typically have for one of those is just the fact that out of a 12 song, 10 song, or 14 song package, minus like the 2 or 3 singles, most of the rest of the project is just kind of bunk. I wonder what Cyan thinks of Bruno Mars. He's been all over the place. Let's get some extra thoughts about that man. You know. And Bruno Mars doesn't quite fit that territory, but it would take a pretty offbeat day for me to think of some of these songs that would be worth a listen unless it just comes up randomly. So yeah, that's kind of the thing. So we'll talk about the singles in order. So 24K Magic was the first one. This did not hit number 1, but it's a very, I mean, it feels just very alive. It's energetic. It has like it's an R&B single done correctly, and that's kind of the situation there. Is some folks it's either it has to be like a club joint, but this, I mean, it doesn't really feel so much like a club joint that 24 Karat Magic is. You can tell just by the structure of the song that it's just a social song. I mean, Bruno Mars reached a point within the past 3 or so years from when 24K came out that um it was like, yeah, this is just me going out for a night. It doesn't even have to be me having to go get drunk, something like that. I mean, this is just me. This is just my presence these days. So I like the impact behind that, but there's really not a song like that afterwards. I mean, really, uh, you would think, I mean, Finesse is close, but that's just another one that feels like some sort of 90s. It feels like it would be in a movie from like 1993 or something. And it's an affectionate song, and the Cardi B remix helped. I mean, it really made it climb, but um, I'm trying to think of, well, we'll get to that. So the next one is That's What I Like, that one feels more R&B, but that it kind of has like a rich setting for it, rich mindset for it. And I mean, it has 1 billion plays on Spotify, so this is the most popular song out of all the songs on this project. And I do like it just out of just me hearing it as often as I did, but it's not quite as catchy as 24K Magic. It's one of the better songs, but it's not as catchy. But I feel like it's so relatable. You're going to hear it so much that it grows on you. Chunky, or actually Versace on the Floor was the next one. This one is a slow R&B song, and it kind of switches up the tempo. It didn't quite do as well as the first two, but it does. I don't know. It didn't gel with me, but I suppose for folks, I mean, it's a sexy song. That's kind of the situation. It implicates in the song that the bow chicka bow wow is going on, and it's kind of, I mean, for that to be designated within the song, not so much like 24K Magic or the other ones, Chunky, Finesse. Um, it's your choice as to how infectious this is to you. To me, it just wasn't my cup of tea. Now, obviously, saying Versace on the Floor, the rich presence, the things that are mentioned in the song is kind of like, I don't know how you can't like money like this. I mean, this is obviously a song for millionaires, but um, I don't know. I mean, somehow I didn't like the feel to it. you know, this happens to be a thing. It's kind of up in the air as far as like, so I don't know. This to me, the mood was not matching my parameters. But Chunky is the next one. Chunky and Finesse feel very similar. They both have kind of like a charming and more lively. I mean, lively is a word I use just because a lot of this has like energy to it. So those two songs are similar. I'm glad that they were both singles because that's how I think you get charting more often with R&B. I mean, how many R&B albums they go from club song to ballad and they flop, and that's just kind of the situation. I mean, I think Versace on the Floor was essentially a ballad, but kind of with the Bruno touch of it. And I mean, he can do those types of songs, but if you notice that it did not chart as high. So, but yeah, so that's basically 4 out of 5 of the singles I enjoyed. So that's kind of the situation. But then to talk about the rest of the project, like Perm, I mean, I know that was kind of trying to be like 90s and 80s type stuff, but I wasn't really too impressed with the production on there. And Calling All My Lovelies fared better, but it, somehow that one didn't quite stand out either. Um, I don't know. I mean, to me, it would seem like being able to do a song like 24K Magic and then take that infectious singing and that energy that you had and then put it into something like Perm and Straight Up and Down and the rest of them. And I don't know. There just seems to be a difference between that. I don't know. It seemed like there was a focus on saying, okay, this is going to be the single, and this is just an in between song. And instead of, I mean, maybe Bruno Mars purposely did that because he did not want every song to be a single. But that's kind of the thing, to learn about some of this stuff and say, well, this probably, I mean, he had the ability to do it better on an unorthodox jukebox. And that was kind of the thing, thinking of uh, other songs from that album. The fact that some of those just happen to be hits. Although the theme, although the theme of this '90s feel worked, uh, that's kind of the thing. I mean, Bruno nailed it with the singles in terms of the '90s feel, but not as much in terms of the songs that weren't. I mean, honestly, for a person to kind of say, well, an album's going to have 5 singles, it's like I was saying with the Michael Jackson thing earlier. It's kind of, some cases you would almost think a pessimistic kind of complaint to do. But, I mean, obviously, if you're looking just for songs that maybe, if you're just looking for songs they're kind of off the wall by Bruno Mars. You don't really find that. I mean, it's strictly just the songs that you came here for, and that's it. That's like the main theme that you have to understand. So, and that was kind of the problem. I tried listening to Perm again, and I could not really gel with that song. I mean, it's okay, but it feels really retro and probably not in a good way. I mean, that's just the thing about that one. And it's the same thing with Straight Up and Down. So, but yeah, I mean, really, you have to at least take what I say with like a grain of salt. I mean, I know I'm supposed to be a critic and a reviewer who you should admire my opinion, but the main thing about it is when you buy a project, I mean, the main thing you have to always insert in addition to the critic's opinion is just whether or not you truly like the song, and that's kind of where it comes from. So obviously, my recommendation is saying that to me, my recommendation is saying the 5 singles were probably the best points of this project. But if you look a little deeper, there's always you have to deal with the possibility just of personal opinion. But that's where I'm coming from with it. And because I mean, I frequent reviews and that sort of thing often. I mean, I'm constantly looking up reviews for music, just seeing public opinion on so many things. When people say like, "Oh, I hated, Treasure by Bruno Mars," I'm like, damn, I don't know how you could say that. I felt like that was a pretty glossy song. To me, that was an electric song. So just those types of subjects is kind of that's why I say, if someone just blatantly says that they hate this song, it's not like the end of the world. Obviously I shouldn't have to explain this, but that's the thing. So, um, I kind of like being like a voice of reason. I suppose that would be the best way of putting it with this Bruno Mars project. But, as far as scoring it, I'm going to have to say I'm just going to give it, out of 9 songs, I'm going to give it like a 5 out of 10. And I'll tell you the 4 songs that I enjoyed and I recommend to you. So that would be 24K Magic, Chunky, That's What I Like, and then Finesse. For all 4 of which were singles. I would almost say Versace on the Floor would be an almost song, but I mean, I don't know how many times it would take listening to that song to finally convince myself of liking it. But like I was saying, there's really not that many good album cuts, and by that I mean there isn't any. The singles are the best moments, and then one of the five singles didn't do it. So that's, I say it's average. You know, obviously the social score is high. That gets like a 9 or a 10 just because it had five singles. They all charted rather well, except for either Chunky. I think it was Chunky that didn't chart that well, but you know, obviously he's Bruno Mars. He hits #1 on the Billboard all the time. I mean, he was one of the most bankable stars of the 2010s decade, and you know, he knows how to make a good hook. So that's kind of the situation with that. And but you know, I have to keep, you know, saying that I was disappointed that he didn't have like the album cuts figured out. So obviously this could have been like, I don't know, in terms of when people say, well, what's a classic Bruno Mars album? That to me is kind of a good question, because it's like, well, Bruno Mars could definitely fill out a greatest hits album, but I don't know to be able to say that he has like a classic album. That's kind of the thing. I mean, he normally does like 9 songs, but I would probably say at this point, Unorthodox Jukebox is probably the closest one to his true classic. But you know, to be able to talk about whether or not he can drop classic albums, I think the fact that he can get to the fifth single is something you probably need to pay attention to more. But if you're not, it is something to notice, is that, you know, he hasn't really given us a classic album. So 5 out of 10, 9 social. That should let you know.